Shalom, everybody. Seminary Covey here for the week 2 vlog on my journey to a theological PhD. I feel like this week I'm starting to, I don't know if I can say get the hang of it, but I'm starting to understand things a little bit more as to what's going to be expected for the rest of the semester. And I'm kind of trying to, I'm sort of figuring out my way. And that's what I'm going to kind of get into. What I'm changing, what I'm keeping the same, what's working, what's not working, and how my classes have been. So I think the first thing I wanted to talk about was how I am getting my work done. One of the biggest things, I mean, so far it feels like the only thing that is done at the PhD level is reading. It's a whole bunch of reading, as by now you should be aware of. I think it was the first day of class. One of my professors said something along the lines of, you don't study for a PhD, you read for a PhD. And that's kind of what it feels like. It's just reading all the time. I remember going back to when I was an undergrad, they would, in the syllabus, they would give you a section, they would assign a book to read, and they would say, by next week, be sure to have this chapter read. By next week, be sure to have this chapter read. And by the end of class, you would have gone through the entirety of the book. Then at the master's level, things kind of changed up. They gave you a couple of more books, maybe like 2 or 3 for the class. And they would say, by next week, this section should be read. By the next week, make sure to read this section. And by the end of the entirety of the course, you would have gone through maybe like 2 or 3 books. At the doctoral level, it's make sure by next week you have this book read. It's so much more. It's insane. For each class, I'm reading like at least 1 book. And that's really what it is. 1 book, done, give it back. 1 book, done, move on to the next. But man, am I learning so much. It's really giving me a comprehensive overview of what it is we're studying, which really is the purpose of a PhD, to give you a comprehensive overview of your particular discipline, to show that you are competent to teach it after you leave. So that's what's going on. I guess real quick, we'll talk about what I'm changing as far as my study habits or my reading habits, what's working and what's not working. So as you remember from last week, I said that man, my reading pages per minute or pages per hour had been cut in half, right? I was getting real nervous. I was like, there's not enough time in the day to get all this done, but you just got to get it done. No use in crying about it. Just read. So with my Theology of Martin Luther class, Dr. Bingham wants you to read every word on the page and to comprehend it, understand it, and be able to present it. That's not changing. I still have to cut out all these hours of all these days to make sure I can get that reading done and take really good notes. And we'll talk about the second week class in a little bit, but I wanted to show how there is a difference. So I finished up that book, The Age of Reform, did all my notes and everything. And again, I'm on pace about 20 to 25 words an hour. And the book was, I think, about 450 pages or something. So you do the math, right? It took a lot of hours. However, I get to my next class, the was it God, the Trinity? And we're reading this book. And I told y'all last week, I gave it back to my professor that let me borrow it, but it was called Trinity, the Trinity and the Canon. Now, I thought it was just a book. And I mentioned last week how I'm going to read it academically, you know, what that means. What I really recommend is if you don't know this yet, I don't want to get up because that's going to look weird if I just get up on camera. But I have a book here by Mortimer Adler entitled How to Read a Book. And it is so incredibly helpful on how to read a book and get the main idea and what the arguments are that the author's making, all these things. Now, I had read that book twice already. It was assigned to me as, I believe, an undergrad. And then I read it again when I got to my MDiv because I was like, I got to learn how to read better. I couldn't implement the lessons being taught because I just wasn't that type of a reader. I was like how Dr. Bingham wants me to be, to read every single word. But not all professors, classes, seminars, or books even require that. Some of them are okay with academic reading. And with this book, The Trinity and the Canon, I planned on doing that and employing that and really doing the academic reading, get the main thesis out of it and enough in the notes to where I can have a coherent conversation about the topic. Well, it was a pleasant surprise. What do I mean by that? Well, this book was structured almost like an academic journal. It was a compilation of various essays dealing with particular subjects in the Bible. If I can show real quick, I can at least put up my notes. Do I have my notes on this? File, open. Um, so it allowed me to get much more done as far as study habits that I had initially intended. So, okay, I got my notes. Now, let me share this. Entire screen. Okay, so I thought it was going to be just one book all the way through, and I would get one central thesis, one central argument, one central conclusion, this and that. But that's not what it was. I hadn't even opened the book yet to understand what it was. And it was divided into sections: a history and method section, a biblical witness section, and then lastly, a section on the church. And this all deals with the Trinity within biblical Trinitarianism in the early church, Trinity and modern biblical scholarship, and then the Trinity within the Old Testament: Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts, Pauline epistles, etc. So I had an opportunity to practice academic reading for each one of these particular sections. And by the end of it, I got really good at it. So for example, in biblical Trinitarianism, what I did was I answered all these questions, and I got to do it again for the next section, and I got to do it again for the next section, and I got to do it again for the next section. So by the end of this book, I had a lot of practice on being able to identify the key areas that I wanted to for these books. And it was really cool. It was good exercise. Also, one thing that I got out of this was I noticed that not all readings are created equal. So while it did take me hours and hours and hours to finish that Age of Reform book, I went through this one quick, right? I felt like my old self again. I didn't have to read every single word on the page and look up terms that I hadn't known before and things of that nature. I was able to move through this quick. I was back to reading about 40 or 50 pages an hour. So I got through this book in like a day, easy, with all my notes and everything. Now, that gave me some hope, right? That let me know that I need to take more time on some readings while I don't have to spend so much time in other readings. And now I can plan for that accordingly. I was given another book for this next week for my Martin Luther seminar class, which is another dense book. So I'm going to plan on taking probably 10, 11 hours to finish that book. However, my readings for Trinity and the Canon, I know what the subject matter is and how I'm already accustomed or familiar with a lot of the terminology and concepts that they're speaking of. So I'll be able to move through that quick and I can just plan better. So that's one of the main things, is planning. Another thing is my sleep schedule. As I mentioned, I wake up at 4:30 to get my readings done. I need it, right? I work all day. I live very far from where I work, so it's an hour commute each way. So that's 2 hours of the day gone. I can't do anything with those 2 hours. I can't read. Usually I listen to audiobooks and stuff, but not the books that I need for class. You know what I mean? They're not going to have Oberman in audio format. So I have to sit and read for that. Plus audiobooks, I can retain the information, I've noticed, but I will only retain concepts and general locations of where I may have heard that. I don't get to look at notes. I don't get to check footnotes. I don't get to do any of that stuff that I really like to do with physical or digital books. So different things. Anyways, where's I going with that? The reading sleep schedule. So man, by what was it? By Sunday, I got home from church, and I did some reading, but I went to bed. I was like, I'm going to take advantage of this because I'm not sleepy. What I'm going to do is I'm going to read into the late hours of the night, and then I just won't wake up at 4:30, and I'll see how that works, right? So I stayed up till probably about midnight or 1. I don't even remember. Midnight or 1 reading. And I got a lot done. That's actually when I finished my Age of Reformation book. Age of Reformation? Yeah, Age of Reformation book was that night. And I was real happy. I went to bed. But even though I woke up at 6, which is sleeping in for an hour and a half, I still felt groggy. I felt sleepy at work. There was even a time I like to read during my lunch at work because I need every hour I can to read. As I'm reading at work, I'm there at the computer just like trying to stay awake because my body just didn't feel the same. I don't know if I had already grown accustomed to waking up at 4 and going to bed semi early or what, but it just was not working for me. So I was like, that reading at night stuff is probably not for me. It got so bad that I got home that day from work and I actually had a package. I had a package with a book. I was very happy. Now the thing was, I got during the day, I'm so tired and I'm like, Monday's coming around. Well, it's Monday, and I'm like, I'm not even gonna read tonight. Tonight, I'm just gonna take a break. I'm gonna watch this TV show with my wife, and I'm just gonna relax. Like, not today. I need a break. I don't want to read. Well, then I got a book in the mail, and I wanted to read it, but I was just so drained from looking at the screen and reading all this stuff that I opened up to the table of contents just to see what was in this book, and everything was just like a blur. I was like, oh my gosh, like I can't even. I physically could not read the words. I was like, I just can't do it. I can't do it. So instead of spending time with my wife that night watching a show, we put the kid, well, I think it was just Priscilla here. We put Priscilla to bed, and I was asleep by like 8:30. And boy, did I need it. I woke up at 4:30, refreshed, ready to go. As soon as I woke up, my coffee was already done. So I get my coffee, I come to my office, and I start reading that the Trinity and the Canon book. And that's when I realized that, man, I'm flying through these pages now. I'm writing down my notes. I'm getting exercise and finding the thesis and the interpretive method and all that stuff. So I was like, this is great. This is great for me. So let me see if I can hide this real quick. Stop sharing. Um, so yeah, it was great for me. So I was pretty happy with what I'm going to do. Is I'm going to continue to just wake up early and not stay awake so late at night, because that's just what helps. That's what's working for me, and I'm going to stick with that. Like I said, now I understand the difference between different kind of texts and how much time I need to devote to them, and ultimately to get what I need, which is learning as much information as possible to participate in class discussion. And so I guess that's the next thing we'll get into, how my classes went for this week. First week of class, I felt like a star, right? Well, initially I didn't. Initially, I felt like, what am I even doing there? But by the end of class, I felt like a star. I was like, I'm the only one that really knew this information. And while it didn't meet my expectations, I was happy because I did well. Well, here comes week 2. And my first class, that the theology of Martin Luther, everybody did their reading. Everybody elevated their scholarship. And I thought it was interesting because the class starts and the professor asks a question. Dr. Brigham asked a question. I don't even remember what the question was at this point, but I'm like, yeah, I did my reading already, and I did the same thing the next week, and I know the answer. I'm one of the first people to speak up. And while I got, I don't know if right is a right word, as there's no really right or wrong. There's just insightful or not. But I added to the discussion. We'll say it that way. I added to the discussion. After I answered, the professor asked another question, or he asked anybody else. Pretty much he gave the opportunity for other people to speak, and they did. Everybody else started raising their hand and contributing to the conversation. And I was like, oh, wow, that was awesome insight that person gave. And this person over here, I didn't even see what that person came up with. So it felt that everybody got to the level that I was at, which is awesome, because I didn't want it to just be me. I want everybody to do good. I need people to push me academically. And that's what happened. While I think that maybe they just didn't do their reading for the first week, they definitely did it for their second week, and it showed. And it was just awesome. It was an awesome time being in class and hearing everybody's various research methodologies and how they came to the conclusions that they came to and found the insights that they found. And it was also interesting to see what they pick up on. Everybody has different, what's the word? everybody has different interests. I guess you could say they have different things that they're drawn to when they read or when they study or what have you. And it was interesting to see everybody's perspective come out because it showed what they were interested in. It showed what they were about. And it was just very cool. I enjoyed being in the class. It was an awesome class to where everybody did good. I appreciated it. Then we get to Thursday where I have my seminar on God, the Trinity. This one was very cool because my professor, Dr. Yarnell, I don't have the book anymore. Like I said, I gave it back to my professor who let me borrow it, the one that I work with. Dr. Yarnell contributed to one of those articles. He actually wrote the article on the Holy Spirit in Revelation. No, the Holy Spirit in preaching. And it's so good how he wrote in here. And you can really see the theology of my professor kind of coming through. As I mentioned last week, he was really about reclaiming Nicene Christianity. And he brought up some things and he reiterated it regarding some theologians who he sees having, I'm not going to say he called them Arians specifically, but he did say they had some Aryan tendencies. And I'm not going to call it out right now because it would take too much time to explain, but it was interesting. However, we were going to discuss this book and we were going to discuss all the various articles. And what he did was he actually invited the editor of the book, the one that put it all together, to join us in class so we can talk to him more. Now, what I found interesting about this, it made me feel really good because this editor, his name is Dr. Brandon Smith, and he actually did his dissertation under Dr. Michael Bird, who's a New Testament scholar. No. He's really about church history and also does some New Testament stuff, but he has a podcast right now with one of my favorite theologians, N.T. Wright. And so these names, they're big names, you know what I mean? And I'm being, in a sense, associated with them in some way. I'm in the same room with them. And it was just very cool. There was a certain point in which I asked a question. There's an article in the book titled Old Testament, right? The Trinity in the Old Testament. And it takes a lot of theology to get the Trinity in the Old Testament. You're not going to read it verbatim. This is the Holy Spirit. This is Jesus. This is God that did this. There takes some theology to do that. And in the Old Testament section, it gave 9 verses that allude to the Trinity. But it takes some theology to do that. So I asked a question I asked it of Dr. Yarnell, but Dr. Smith also gave a response as well. I was like, how do the Old Testament guys feel about the theology you're putting into the exegesis of the Old Testament to get the Trinity? Old Testament and New Testament scholars are really about the text. They say that they are the only ones that come to the text objectively without any presuppositions, and everybody else is bringing some sort of presupposition to the text. And so I was like, how do they feel about that? You know what I mean? How do they feel reading stuff like this? And Dr. Smith, he said something that was really interesting. He says that while they do think they're the only ones that come to the text objectively, they're not. Everybody comes to the text with presuppositions. Let's see if I have to close some stuff. It's kind of glitchy. Close window. All right, hopefully that helps. He said everybody comes to the text with some presuppositions. And he was like, for instance, one of my friends, and then he tells me he was Dr. David De Silva says this. And I'm not going to tell you all that was said or whatever, but he mentioned Dr. David De Silva and how they have correspondence and they talk and they're friends. And this was a big deal for me because I've actually taken courses on my Logos Bible software taught by Dr. David De Silva. So it's just wild. It's wild to me that I am in, like I said, that I'm in this room with all of these people who are like big names in the theological game, you know? And what was very cool is towards the end of the seminar, Dr. Yarnell asked Dr. Smith, he was like, if you can give these students, he was all of them here are PhD students. They're the next generation of leaders, teachers, and preachers. What's some information that you would give to them before you go? And it stuck with me because of all the people that were named. Dr. Yarnell is a big name. You know, Dr. Smith, who studied under Dr. Bird, who is friends with Dr. De Silva. Like, he's saying that we are the next generation of them. and it's very cool to hear. And again, I'm just very appreciative to be in this position, and it's awesome. It's awesome. Um, but yeah, so that's what happened in the seminars. That's what happened with my study habits. For this next week, I got to read a book. Let's see if I can share again. I got to read a book, Luther, between God and the Devil, and as you see, it's about 400 pages. So I'm going to dedicate probably about 10 or 11 hours to it. I already did my notes for it. I did the outline based on, and this is what I recommend for anybody else. Go a little bit faster. When people are doing their notes on this, go to the table of contents and divvy up your notes by how it mentions it. So I have my info and preface. I noticed that Dr. Bingham asked a lot of questions about the author of the last book, and most of our discussion was dedicated to what was actually written in the preface, which I didn't get to. No, I got to the preface, but I didn't take notes on it from the last book. Another student did, and that's why I was like, they offered insights that I wasn't aware of. So on this one, I'm gonna dig into the info of the author, a little bit of the preface, and then as you see here, I have my part 1 divvied up by chapter, part 2 divvied up by chapter, part 3 divvied up by chapter, and it just helps to organize the notes. In addition, I know how to sort of refine my notes. While I was taking still kind of bullet note type notes, which I'm probably still going to do, it's going to be less of quotations and sort of reinterpretations of what the author says, and I'm going to try to stick to concepts more, because that's really how we were speaking of, in concepts, not exactly what did the author say, but how does that fit in totality with the entire conversation. So that's how I'm going to be doing my notes from now on, at least as I continue to refine in my Martin Luther class. In Trinity in the canon, well, I was supposed to read those, I think it was Augustine, Gregory, and Thomas Aquinas, because it says in the syllabus that you should already be familiar with them. I'm going to be honest, I wasn't able to get to those readings. So I was like, maybe I'll just get to it next week. It's not like he actually told us that we have to read it. We should just be familiar with it. Well, luckily, on the, I don't know that I have the syllabi up, or the syllabus, but I don't really need it. The reading for this week for God the Trinity is actually those words. So in my mind, I was like, okay, I mean, he said we should already be familiar with it. However, he's assigning it still. So I'm going to get the opportunity to read those books as actually assigned. Altogether, I think it'll be about 600, 700 pages. Hopefully that gives me enough time to dig into this book that one of the professors that I work with, he gave me whenever we were going through, what book was it? In God the Trinity, we were talking about certain individuals that have Aryan leanings, and he mentioned something that was a foreign concept to me. He mentioned generate. Let me see my notes. I have it in my notes. Oh, if you were able to pause, it'll say the name of the person he's calling kind of Aryanist. Generation. What does generation mean? And he said it's essentially he is the son who is generated from the father, talking about the relationship between the Trinity. And it was still hard for me to understand. So he gave me this book that talks specifically about eternal generation on page 29. Yeah, chapter 3, eternal generation. So I'm going to try to dig into this as well. And as you can see, this was actually my inspiration. And I know one of my coworker buddies, he watches my vlogs, and he told me I was I was giving a lot of credit. Not that it's undeserved, but that I was kind of sucking up. I don't know. I guess would be the best way to say it, to the professor that I work with. But it's because I'm really a fan of what he does. You know, he's someone I look up to academically. He's one of the first people that showed how to take proper notes. I don't know if you can see that, but he takes proper notes within the margin of exactly where things are listed and what's the thesis and the argument and all that. And it's awesome. So I'm going to read this, hopefully, if I have enough time, just to get a better understanding of this generation and how one generates from another and things of that nature. And then maybe I'll get into the Judophobia book that I got as well. But stop sharing that. But yeah, I think I guess that's really it for this week. I'm going to keep it short and simple, as not a whole lot happened. I just really wanted to go over what is going to change in my study habits, the difference in those readings, that history that's really in depth and dense and that I need to take crazy notes for, versus the Trinitarian books in which I can just do academic reading and get the main thesis and points, how I can breeze through that, what I learned in class a little bit. I don't want to give too much away. Maybe I don't know, maybe I'll do a separate thing in where I really get into the teachings of the class. But there was some good stuff. I'll give you one thing. You talked me into it. I'll give you one thing. So let me go ahead and share again. Entire screen. And let me go ahead and blow this up. So I'll just tell you. I'll tell you. So oh my gosh, this kind of upset me. Upset me, but in a funny way. For those that don't know me, I don't know, maybe people will end up watching this, but I am a huge fan of Dr. Michael Heiser. He is my favorite theologian. It was because of his documentary on the unseen realm that it changed the way I viewed the Bible and academics of the Bible. That's when everything started to change for me. And so he will forever hold a special place in my heart because of that. I actually have a little picture of him on my desk at work because, he's a very big inspiration to me. But I also know that he is not one of the top Old Testament or New Testament scholars. I know what Dr. Heiser is. But Dr. Yarnell said something whenever we were talking about monotheism and how that's an anachronistic term brought about by I don't know if it was Aristotelian or Platonic thought, one of them, but it's an anachronism. We brought that back in to try to explain what the Jews may have believed. But he says this, he was like, in this section right here, he says, there's no way you can read the Old Testament and think that the Jews were strict monotheists. And I'm not talking about that Michael Heiser nonsense. And I'm like, what? How are you going to diss my point like that? Right? I was a little like, ugh. But I mean, I know that he knows things that I don't know. So I had to just humble myself and not get to the point of disagreeing yet. Maybe he knows something, maybe not. I don't know. But I just thought it was funny. I was like, man, why is he got to do Heiser like that? But that was one thing. That's not exactly what I want to talk about. The one thing was talking about the Trinity. He said there was most of the heresies we see come because of how people describe God. And one of the first ones was modalism, and that was a harsh response to tritheism. And then there was Arianism, which was a harsh response to modalism. And he says there you can see the chain of heresy because they're overly responding to something that came before it. And then he gave us the difference between heresy and error. He said heresy is a teaching that if you continue to do, you suffer church discipline and are excommunicated. While an error is just being incorrect on something, but it's not a big deal. Now he started to go in on, let me make this a little bit bigger. He started to go in again on Wayne Grudem and his systematic theology. I think did I say it last time? I think I said it last time where him and a few of his colleagues, they were all asked to look at Wayne Grudem's systematic theology and sort of vet it, I guess is a good word. Now, it is a good systematic theology. I'm not taking that away from anybody. So if you or anybody has rely on Wayne Grudem's systematic, it's good. It's just for people that are really, really nitpicking and getting in depth with this. They say that Wayne Grudem, while not an Arian, has Arian tendencies. And he kind of gets into it. He tells us that it's because of how he describes the relationship between the Father, Son, and Spirit, which is called subordinationalism. Subordinationalism? Yeah. I don't have the book up. I should have brought the book up. But in Wayne Grudem's systematic theology, he talks about the Son's eternal subordination to the Father. And that kind of goes against Nicene orthodoxy. And because of that, you can't call it orthodoxy. He's saying that Wayne Grudem wants to call himself orthodox, but he is leaning towards some Arian type modalism, in a sense that the Son is eternally subordinate to the Father. And if you're eternally subordinate, that means you're eternally less than. And if Jesus is God in the full sense of the word, he cannot be less than in any way. And there's going to be some people that say, but that's in role and not in function. Agreed. That's how I believe, but I don't know enough, right? These are all guys that know enough. And they were like, yeah, that sounds good. But the way that Wayne Grudem summarized it to make it easier for us to understand, he was all, it's in the same way that a wife is subordinate to her husband. And that's the problem. Dr. Yarnell said is when we try to define terms so concretely, we end up creating issues because we are bound by human logic and English language to identify the things of God, and it just won't work. It's like that saying that any analogy will eventually break down. It's sort of the same way. So this is where Dr. Yarnell said that he's not supposed to be eternally subordinate to, because that makes him eternally less than. That Grudem denies eternal generation. Now, he did say that he changed his teaching in 2016, but that's because people were calling him unorthodox. And the editor of the book that we're talking about, Dr. Brandon Smith, he was speaking on subordinationism too. This is where he was talking about that he looked into a systematic theology, and that Wayne Grudem actually says that while he made a joke about it, he was like, while he says that God does have one will, if a son is subordinate to the father and has to do what he says, that makes him having a different will. So that's two wills. Dr. William Lane Craig is one that believes that God has two wills. But Wayne Grudem, according to all these people that looked into this stuff, Wayne Grudem says that God has one will, but three willies, Father, Son, and Spirit. And I thought that was just a funny way of talking about it. So it was a critical issue because it makes Jesus a lesser Lord with less authority. And that's when he brings in that generation. Look into that eternal generation. I honestly, I didn't know enough about it. So I got to look into that. That's why I want to read that book and just find out a little bit more about this eternal generation. So that's kind of a little bit of an insight what we talk about in seminar and how it's just like a whole nother level. We're not just reading these books. They're telling us what like I mentioned, the shot callers in the game, what they say about it. And again, of course, he gets into how modern evangelicalism is just a little bit off concerning these things. But one day he hopes that with proper preaching and teaching, we can have a better understanding, and it would better equip the saints for to spread God's correct gospel message, which is a triune message, and it'll just better equip the saints for the furthering of the kingdom of God. So yeah, with that, this one's going to be a little shorter because, like I said, I got to go read. It's already getting a little bit late in time, so I got to get in this and read. But, thank you again for joining me. This was week 2, and I hope you're enjoying watching these as much as I am making them. Until next week, I'll see you. Shalom.